Hey, everybody, welcome to our daily podcast, View from the Pew. Election was Tuesday, and if you hear any of my podcasts recently, it was kind of a surprise. And I think it doesn't matter if you were for Trump or against Trump, it was kind of surprising. And we wanted to kind of invite a couple people on to kind of decipher what happened and maybe figure out what's the next steps for the Democratic Party and what we might see over the next 4 years. And no better person to have on than editor David DeWitt. He's the editor of the Ohio Capitol Journal. David, thanks for coming on. How's it going today?
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. It's been a busy week. My day job is working PR for racial and social justice organizations. So, as you might be able to tell, obviously, some of the clients we work with, it's been a kind of a soul searching week with what happened Tuesday night. What were you thinking kind of going into the election? Did you see this happening? It seemed to come a little bit as a surprise to me.
Yeah, so going into Tuesday, you saw the polls that were, pretty much dead even across the board in the presidential race. And I didn't know if that was them trying not to underestimate Trump again, because the pollsters had underestimated him a lot in the past, the previous two times in 2016 and 2020. So I know that they were waiting to try to avoid underestimating Trump. So I thought that, I thought that the polls being even, like it was going to be a fairly close election. I thought it really was. I thought there was a chance that we wouldn't know the outcome of the presidential race on Tuesday night. I thought that it might be another nail biter, kind of like 2020. But what ended up happening is that there was pretty much a red wave across the country. There was a red shift across the country, certainly. I think every single state in the country, even if they didn't go fully red, they shifted red to some degree. And except for Colorado, actually, that is the one state out of 50 that shifted to the left and did not
Mm.
shift right at all. Um, so I think the polls kind of actually did underestimate Donald Trump again, and by a couple percentage points there. And there was definitely a red shift. I think that part of it was the global backlash to incumbency that we've seen since the pandemic. This year alone, pretty much every global election that we've had has been a reaction against incumbency and the inflation that came out of the pandemic with the supply side problems and the stimulus and all of that. So in Ohio specifically, though, there was that same right where I wouldn't say that it was that strong of a shift, though. If you look at the actual numbers, I mean, it's pretty much 55 to 44.
Mm.
And if you average the last 10 statewide elections in Ohio, election years, that's pretty much what you're getting, 55, 56 to 43, 44. So the Ohio elections, the three Ohio Supreme Court races, 55 to 44. These are unofficial results. They still need to be counted, but 55 to 44. The um, the presidential race was basically 55 to 44. And then the Sherrod Brown race was the one that was the outlier. It was 50 to about 46. So Bernie Moreno got right now, and there's still provisionals and outstanding absentee ballots to be counted, but 50 to 46. So there wasn't a huge shift to the right in Ohio that I saw. What I saw was Ohio maintained its 55 to 44 Republican leanings, and definitely stuck with, the this is the third time now Ohio's gone for Donald Trump, so Ohio definitely likes Donald Trump.
It was interesting. And, let's talk about some of the higher races, then we can get back to the national. The Marino Sherrod Brown race, it kind of reminded me of Tim Ryan against J.D. Vance. You had a kind of a political outsider in Vance. You had someone that had a lot of experience in Ryan. And, I think the world of Sherrod Brown, but I had that same weird vibe going into this race. Like, as an editor, I would get 10 press releases a day from Sherrod Brown, nothing from Bernie Moreno. And I literally had to scout down his communication director. And I pretty much said, look, if we write about one person, we like to write about the other. And I had to, there was no interest in appealing to the media or having press releases or anything else like that. But the thing that struck me, though, is Marino ran on a I like Trump ticket. There really wasn't much on what Marino had to do with it. He just said, I like Trump. But, as you just said, Marino had 50% of the vote. Trump had 55% of the vote. I think that says a lot about Bernie Marino, because if you're really gung-ho about Trump, wouldn't you just vote for Marino? Like, it seemed to say a lot about Marino that even all the people like Trump didn't seem like Marino in Ohio. And that struck me weird. I mean, he won the race, but it was just weird the way it turned out.
Oh yeah, no, I mean he certainly won by a lot less than the other Republicans in the Supreme Court races, and by Trump as well. And I think that speaks to the popularity of Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown's been an incumbent for a long time. He's done a lot of things in Congress for communities in Ohio, for workers. Specifically, auto workers and manufacturing workers throughout the state. They have personal experiences with Sherrod Brown on a level that, it's not like they would have that with certainly the Democratic presidential candidate, but not even the Supreme Court justices, for instance.
Yeah.
So I think that Sherrod was able to peel off a certain amount, clearly, of Trump voters, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't really nearly enough to be able to be really competitive. I mean, while Moreno did get over 50%, it's still a 4-point race. So it wasn't. Most of the polls, they showed it tightening with Sherrod Brown and Moreno toward the end. Moreno pulling within 2, but most of them still had Sherrod up, and those turned out to be wrong. They were an underestimation. Marino actually won fairly solidly, although not as solidly as the rest.
I think it's disappointing, no matter where your politics lie, for our listeners out there. Sherrod Brown's been doing this for a long time, and Sherrod Brown, you may think he's too liberal or conservative or whatever you think about him. I get frustrated when guys that have 20 years of experience come in as a large underdog to a political novice. That just strikes me as odd. And it would be the other way if, Marino was more liberal and Sherrod Brown was the red line conservative. I feel weird about that. It made me sad. I felt bad for Sherrod Brown in the race because of that.
Well, what's interesting to me, well, first of all, I want to circle back about what you mentioned earlier as far as Marino and what we can expect from him and what he was running on. He was pretty wishy-washy about his previous run in 2022 and what he said about his pretty hard right stances then. And it seemed like he was very much trying to follow Trump's lead and whatever Trump was saying on the campaign trail. So I think in Congress, that's pretty much what we can expect from him. He's going to be a rubber stamp for whatever it is that Trump wants, basically, in U.S. Congress. And that is what Marino has positioned himself to be, a yes man to J.D. Vance, a yes man to Donald Trump. So he will now be our senior senator in starting in 2025, because somebody will have to replace J.D. Vance now, and Governor Mike DeWine will make that appointment. So you're right. What's interesting is we're going to have 2 brand new senators in 2025. And one of the big jobs of congressional people that a lot of people don't talk about is constituent services. So this is just stuff that you're doing to help out your constituents when they call your office and they ask for help. And so with 2 brand new senators, JD Vance wasn't so hot with constituent services during his 2 years. As we both kind of alluded to, Sherrod Brown is excellent with constituent services. That's something that Ohio is losing, at least for now. And we will see if Bernie Moreno and whoever Mike DeWine selects to be the junior U.S. Senator in Ohio are going to put an emphasis on constituent services and doing things for Ohio, or whether they're just there to carry out the Trump agenda, no matter what it might be. Or maybe a mixture of both. I don't know. We'll see. But there is a lot up in the air, and we are definitely losing something in, well-established constituent services that Sherrod Brown had done.
Yeah, and if Bernie Marino gets wind of this, prove us wrong. But I get the vibe from Bernie Marino. I'm kind of looking at like a Jim Jordan type thing, which in the MAGA universe, Jim Jordan's pretty popular because, he vents and yells about Trump stuff. But how much have you seen Jim Jordan doing from his home region, home area? You don't see quite as much. And I'm wondering if I'm getting the same vibe from Marino. I hope I'm wrong, but that's the vibe I'm getting. Vance,
We'll just have to see.
Yeah, for as pro-Trump as Vance has been, obviously during the campaign, at least you see Vance doing like saying some things, like he's spoken out about East Palestine and stuff like that. Obviously he's turned more of the rubber stamp guy, but we'll see. I'm fascinated by this. So in Mike DeWine, yeah, he does a lot of things with Republican Party. I think he's still a staunch Republican, but it's clear, reading between the lines, he's not a Trump guy. And the relationship's really fantastic. It's just amazing because DeWine bites his tongue. DeWine doesn't go off on tirades against Trump. I think Trump doesn't like DeWine, but I think Trump respects him enough where there's times he'll take shots, but it's just not this adversarial, get him out of here type of relationship. So I read your coverage. I read the other coverage about DeWine's selection. Who is he going to pick? If you read some of his quotes, he's like, I'll look at somebody who, reaches across the aisle. I'm willing to, someone who could get reelected. So it seems to be, and here's my hope. My political heroes are guys like John McCain and Joe Lieberman, guys that, are on both sides of the aisle. They reach across, they want to find what's best for America. I think that's who DeWine's looking for, which is kind of fascinating. And it's up to DeWine to make the choice, but he wants someone to get reelected. And as much as I like the moderate philosophy, how's that going to get reelected in the Republican Party? I'm not sure who he's going to pick. I think this is going to be really, really fascinating.
I am exactly with you there, Chris, because I thought the same thing reading his quotes about it. Simultaneously, he's saying that he wants somebody who's going to get things done for Ohio and focus on Ohio and kind of be a servant to the people in the old type of traditional mold, really. And that indicates more moderate, more bipartisan, that type of stuff. But at the same time, he's saying that he wants somebody who can win a primary in the modern Trumpist Republican Party. And that does not indicate any sort of moderation, right? Yeah. So you think like if he endorsed Matt Dolan, for instance, in the primary against Bernie Marino, and I think Matt Dolan is kind of who he's describing as somebody who's pretty reasonable, who's pretty moderate, who's going to try to serve, the best interests of people. I personally, as an opinion columnist, probably disagree with a decent amount of policy with Matt Dolan, but I don't see him as any sort of extra. I see him kind of like DeWine, like where I disagree with some things on policy, but essentially there's a professionalism there that I can respect, but could Matt Dolan win a primary? He didn't. He didn't win two primaries,
Well,
so where does that lead to DeWine, and who else is there? I agree. It will be a fascinating thing to see. Just to briefly mention for the listeners who other names that have been thrown out there in no particular order whatsoever. People have mentioned other statewide elected office holders currently, such as Robert Sprague. Obviously, Secretary of State LaRose ran for the Senate. He's probably lobbying DeWine, asking, because he certainly wants that position. He ran for it. Attorney General Dave Yost has been mentioned, but people say he's not an executive. He wants to run for governor. I expect that he intends to run for governor, and he does not want this appointment. Lieutenant Governor John Husted has been mentioned as well, but he also wants to be governor. And DeWine kind of in his comments the other day said that he thinks Husted will be a great governor. Like he kind of mentioned that. So it sounds like he expects Husted to run for governor. I've heard Jane Timken mentioned, the former chairwoman of the Ohio Republican Party. I've heard some United States House representatives like Mike Carey mentioned from the Columbus area, although his people kind of demurred when they were asked about it. I've heard Vivek Ramaswamy, the pretty radical, interesting Cincinnati area guy who now lives in Upper Arlington, I think, but he ran for president, has made a name for himself in right wing politics the past year or so. That's a really wide array of characters who would bring very different things to the position when you're thinking about it. And when you take that list of people and you put it up against what DeWine's saying, as you mentioned, it's hard to imagine who he is talking about there, who can win primaries, but also be kind of in the DeWine vein of a practical, performing politician who gets things done as opposed to just preens for the cameras and whatnot. I guess the only other thing that I would want to mention about that is whoever he selects will have to run for re-election in 2026 and then have to turn around and run for re-election again in 2028 for the full term of the position. So it's somebody who has to be comfortable running these elections. They're going to be running for office for 4 years, basically 3 years at least. So you got to have somebody who's comfortable with that. And that makes me think actually maybe a congressman is what DeWine is thinking, because they're used to running every 2 years anyway. Much smaller races. Obviously, U.S. congressional districts aren't as big as U.S. Senate, but at least they're used to the cycle of campaigning that way.
Well, I suck at predictions if it's sports or politics, but I would, if we had to bet money on this, Matt Dolan, because I can't imagine DeWine unless he's just like, I'm old, screw it. I don't think he's picking a MAGA type guy. Or woman.
I don't think he should. I think he should remain true to himself. I mean, this is Ohio's U.S. senator. It's an important position. I think that DeWine has some ethics and scruples that he should live up to with his very important appointment.
Well, here's the crazy thing. So if you had to bet, I think Matt Dolan's the guy. Now, I think Dolan's going to have a hard time being reelected. I wonder about Husted. And yeah, you're right. With his statement, you would think he would be a governor. I know Husted's a lot more of a Trump guy than DeWine is, but maybe DeWine can sleep a little bit at night if he makes that pick. Here's the crazy thing. I've seen this on a couple different coverage, so I'm sure he said it. He's like he considers somebody with no political experience, which sounds crazy as all get out. But if you think about it, like you said, he seems to be at least a decent guy. I think he feels like he still definitely wants to be a Republican, but obviously there's a lot of Republicans that don't like him based on some of the things he did during COVID and other stuff like that. Who could be this person with no political experience? I mean,
so there's the only two people I can think of out of all the people that I just talked about when he mentions that. There's Vivek Ramaswamy. He has no political experience. And then actually, technically, Jane Timken has never held elected office either.
Okay.
She's only been the chairwoman. She's run for elected office. She ran for Senate, and what was that? Was that the first time? 2022. But so those are the two names that I can think of when that gets hinted at. I believe it was a question from the media: would you consider somebody with no political experience? And he wouldn't take it off the table. But those are the two names I think of. I don't know if there are others though.
You don't think it's going to be like former state house reporters you may be buddy with, right?
Not that I know of. DeWine's pretty good. DeWine's very professional with the press, as opposed to, pretty much. There are some other statewide office holders who are professional with the press. Dave Yost's office is pretty professional with the press. Faber's office. Secretary of LaRosa's office is not. J.D. Vance's office is not. Bernie Moreno's office was not professional with the press during this campaign. So I don't know if DeWine probably doesn't care about that, but if he does, DeWine's office is very professional with the press. So.
Well, U.S. Senator Randy Ludlow has a so just throwing out there. Nobody aggregate me. I don't know this. I'm just wondering if he totally, threw a curveball. I think DeWine wants to enjoy retirement, but could he pick himself? Wouldn't that be a curveball?
People have speculated about that. I don't see it. I don't see that happening. I think he's retiring after the governorship, but.
Or can you imagine if Fran DeWine gets selected? I would be a friend with any policy experience, but the Buckeyes. I've had some Fran DeWine Buckeyes, and again, I don't know, David. I'm not sure about the policy, but the Buckeyes. During this election campaign, I vote for somebody that can make me a good Buckeye.
There you go. It is a home state classic.
2 quick questions. Issue 1, did that surprise you?
I think it surprised everybody. I think it surprised Republicans. Yeah. I did not know that. I thought it wouldn't track with the partisan things as much as it did. It tracked almost entirely with the partisan races. I thought that just because it was an issue, because there was no partisan label on it, that it might just defy the kind of partisan leanings of the election outcome, but it didn't seem to at all.
I mean, I did a podcast that pretty much just said, look at the maps. The maps look screwy as all get out. Doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. These maps don't make sense. You would have to look at it and say, we got some funky looking maps.
Well, yeah, the maps look absurd. The facts are, after this election, Democrats did gain 2 seats in the Ohio House and 2 seats in the Ohio Senate, but the numbers still show the Ohio Senate is 65 Republican to 34 Democratic. It went from 26 Republican to 24 Republican in the Ohio Senate, compared to 7 Democrats, now 9 Democrats. So you're still talking about Republicans controlling somewhere between 68 to 74%. 75% of these chambers of our legislature. Meanwhile, Donald Trump won the state by 55% to 44%. It's just not representative. Ohio is a 55 to 44 state, and Republicans control 65 of 99 seats. It's not representative. And you have these absurd districts, and politicians drew these maps that we have now. They were sanctioned by the court. I can't say that they're unconstitutional anymore, because they're not. These are constitutional, but I will still call them gerrymandered because 7 politicians got in a room and drew them. There were 2 vacancies in the Ohio House, 2 vacancies in the Ohio Senate. The Democrats got their token 2 vacancies in each chamber. Republicans threatened to draw something worse if Democrats didn't go along to get along. Democrats said, yep, we'll go along to get along. They got their 2 vacancies. It's still gerrymandered. 65 to 34 in a 55 to 44 state. Come on.
Well, and the funny thing about it, too, if you really think about it, and we've made this argument. For my day job, I represent clients that were very much in favor of issue 1. And, these clients are saying, look, the Democrats did the same thing, too. So you can easily make the argument that right now, obviously, Republicans wanted issue 1 to fail so they can keep their huge majority based on some of the gerrymandering they made. But some of my clients who tend to be more left-leaning than right-leaning but saying, look, it's a problem with Democrats, too. Let's pass it so it'll never be a problem again. And if you're out there, you're a Republican, you're like, yeah, I mean, this is great right now. But okay, wait 10 years. I mean, these things.
Yeah, what if they lose the governorship at some point? The auditor of state at some point down the line, then they won't control the pen anymore. And if Democrats start gerrymandering at that point, well, then that's just what Republicans have asked for by doing all of their gerrymandering now. I don't think politicians should draw their own districts. I think that the evidence shows, whether it's Democrats or in Illinois or Republicans in Ohio, whatever politicians draw their own districts, you get bad results. It just does not compare to the independent commissions. There's those maps drawn by independent commissions, while not perfect, tend to be better representative than the politicians' drawn maps. So voters, for whatever reason, they have their reasons, but they didn't pass this proposed reform. So they've decided that politicians will continue to draw the maps. I think that the evidence shows that politicians will continue to draw self-serving maps. So until and whenever Ohio voters decide that they're not going to let them continue to do that, I think all Ohio voters can expect is to continue to have politician favoritism maps that don't allow any competition in their elections for their state lawmakers. So if they ever feel like they want to have competitive elections, then they should do something about gerrymandering. Otherwise, these uncompetitive state house elections is what they're going to continue to get.
Well, and let's be frank, when you talk about the national race too, okay, you make moves to help your side win. I mean, to me, that's part of the craziness that comes out of Trump, and obviously, it's what's um, made the Republican Party mostly oppose issue one. And okay, it's one thing if the crap you do helps you win. I understand that, but when you're representing people, when there's people out there that are getting screwed because of that, that's a problem too. And people of color and everything else, they're not being represented. And that's the thing that can get very, very sad and difficult. So it's one thing if you're rigging the field to let your side win. Okay, it's a race, it's a political game, you win. But when you're screwing over people, that's what gets tough. One other quick question I wanted to ask you, David. Obviously, we're 4 years away. Who knows who's going to be alive or who wants to run by then? What's your pick for the Democrat nominee for president in 2028?
Oh boy. Oof. I can tell you all the people that I think will be running because I think it'll be a wide field. I have no idea who the American people will pick, though. But I think some of the people who you'll definitely see running, it's going to be a lot of the people who were talked about as the Harris vice presidential pick. So I think that you're going to see your Josh Shapiro's, Jared Polis, Andy Beshear, Gavin Newsom, J.B. Pritzker, Gretchen Whitmer. Those are all the governors that I can think of. And then you'll have your Pete Buttigieg and Raphael Warnock and who are some other legislators who might run. People like that will probably run. Who am I forgetting?
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, there's so many. I think it's going to be a big, big field for sure.
Nothing against Waltz. I love the story. I love his family life. I mean, I don't think he was a drawback. I wonder what happened if Shapiro would have been the guy because they needed Pennsylvania and Shapiro's the governor there.
He's very popular in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania was crucial. Yeah, I don't know.
One other crazy thought, and let's do this soon because there's a billion more things we could talk about. I had an interesting conversation with one of my clients. What would it have looked like? I know she doesn't want to run for office. If Michelle Obama would have been the Democratic, like when Biden dropped out, what if you somehow convinced Michelle Obama? I even before the election, some of my clients.
She is. I think the first thing you said is right. I think she hates politics and she would never do it. And I think she's absolutely right to hate politics. It's it's a very gross game that they play. It's hard to watch as a journalist, as you know. So I don't blame her for hating politics, but the polls do show that she is probably the most popular, aside from Barack, the most popular Democrat with a national profile. So,
and if you like Barack Obama, you get 4 more years of Barack. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Their spouses, I'm sure they'll have some ideas.
I'm like, and that was true at least as of the summer was when I saw that. Popularity among national profile Democrats, Michelle Obama was head and tails above everybody else. Just far and away the most popular Democrat nationally. So I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Well, Dave, this has been fun, and there's a a lot more questions we can ask. Let's do this again before long. If you have any questions, let us know. For our listeners, give us a like or subscribe. It helps us get on the YouTube algorithm a little bit better. I can't even say algorithm today. But for David, this is Chris. Thanks for checking us out. Have a great day. David, hang on for a second.
All right. Thank you, Chris.